From there, I went to one of my favorite areas, which was in Bremen-Nord. And this is where I became like the lead companion, the senior companion. Elder Love was my first companion there. And we were out, we did a lot of, I guess in most of these areas, most of our contacting in Bielefeld and Sleef, in Heide and Oldenburg was a lot of street contacting. And so in the German mission that I was in, that was our primary activity for contacts, is to stand and to walk around in the Fußgänger zones and meeting people, introducing ourselves, introducing people to the Book of Mormon. We'd have a quick little introduction to Joseph Smith. We'd do mini first discussions, because that's a lot of times all the time that we had. And so we'd go through asking them, do you think it's important to have prophets? What would it mean to you if there was a prophet today? Would you be interested in hearing what they had to say? Different ways of introducing. Have you ever heard of the Book of Mormon? And when you'd start with that, they'd probably, oh, you guys are Mormons, and I'm not really interested in. But you'd have a lot of in the northern part of Germany, it was more Protestant, Methodist, Lutheran, more Lutherans, because of Martin Luther and his history with separating himself from the Catholic Church, and that revival period of time that took hold in the northern part of Germany when they kind of wanted to break off from the Catholic Church, and so that was a big, the religious sects of the day up there. Protestantism, evangelisch is what they would call themselves, or freie evangelisch, free from any specific denomination, but still having that Protestant background. Was primarily the main religion in the area, but it was wonderful to have that experience. Got to meet a lot of great people. Got to meet one young man. His name was Bernd, 17-year-old young man. Got to teach him and baptize him. There was also Thomas, was another young man that we met there. But the highlight of that Bremen-Nord area was my companion and I were out tracting one day, a little bit more south from the main street zone where we would normally contact people, and we'd been knocking and tracting out the doors, and we'd gone through one of the neighborhoods and tracked it out, and it was getting to be about 8 o'clock, and we were about an hour's bike ride, 45-minute bike ride from our apartment, and we decided that it was time to go back, get our bikes, and start heading back, and we'd take a little bit of time there in the Fußgänger zone and talk to a few more people before we headed on back down to our apartment. And as we were heading back towards our bikes, I just had the impression that we needed to go knock a few more doors. And so we went back, and it was the corner house of the cul-de-sac area that we had just tracked through. And it was my turn to make the door approach. And so I knocked on the door, and first backing up, as we're walking in, I see the kind of the front grass area, and they had some hedge bushes, and it's a little bit overgrown and a little more wild and natural, and I just, the impression I thought was, oh, here's somebody who's a little more naturalistic and so we came up to the door, and I knocked on the door, and the impression this face came to my mind of who it was. It was like I said, a little bit more natural type person and a little bit older person, and knocked on the door, and the woman opened the door, and it was like I had seen her before. Just that impression. I didn't see the exact images, but that impression of an older woman came to my mind before I knocked on the door. And as she opened the door, I saw her, and it's like, oh, okay, this is going to happen. And I said, my name's Elder Baird, and this is my companion, Elder Love. Isn't that a great name? And she, at first, she didn't want to do anything with us, but I just mentioned that we had just a brief message that we'd like to share, and she said, well, okay, come on in for a few minutes. And she brought us in, and she was actually babysitting her grandchildren. That was her daughter's house, and her house was actually in the cul-de-sac that we had tracted through. She just happened, she wasn't home when we tracted her house, but she was there at that place. And so we started talking with her, and she had just brought some bread out of the oven, and we had sat down and we shared our message with her. Well, long story short, we ended up spending a couple hours there, really, because her grandkids had come home. Her dog had come home, and the dog had some ticks on it because it'd been running out in the woodlands that was out across the street from her, and these ticks were buried in it. Well, I had some experience removing ticks, so I spent the evening helping to remove these ticks from the dog. Go figure. But from that experience, we started teaching her and teaching her the gospel. And she had been looking for something for quite a while, going to various churches and whatnot. And we invited her to come with us to church that coming Sunday, and she agreed. And she was not your typical German. She was much more open. I don't want to say friendly, because I don't want the German people to make it sound like the Germans are not friendly. They're very, very friendly, but they're very, very reserved, and kind of, when you first meet them, they're a little stand back. You're a little more formal with them, and until they get to know you, and once they invite you into their circle of friends and in circle and influence, then you're part of their friendships. You're part of their family, kind of, so to speak. And so at first there's this standoffish, but then it's very warm once they're invited in. But she was different. She was more, she seemed to have adopted some of the American lifestyle type, or that interaction of being much more open and friendly when you first meet somebody. She had a sister that was living here in America, so she had visited to America a couple times, and so I think that's why she opened the door for us and let us in, is because of that experience with Americans. But we had asked Sister Fabrini, who was one of the members that was living there in Bremen-Nord, to take us and to bring Sister Kelman to the church. And so that Sunday, Sister Fabrini picked us up, and we went over and we picked up Sister Kelman, and then got on the freeway, and it was only about a half-hour drive in a car on the Autobahn to get down to the ward building. Whereas if we'd invited her to go with us and we'd taken the trains, it would have taken us roughly about an hour and a half, maybe it was almost 2 hours, to get to the ward building. And so it was a good thing that we'd got the ride with Sister Fabrini. But while we were there, I had the opportunity to serve as one of the priests in the sacrament, and my companion, Elder Love, was sitting with Sister Kelman there in the... no, it was actually reversed. He was up there, and I was with her. And she'd started crying. Or he had pointed out that she was a little bit crying, and afterwards we talked to her, and she said, "Oh, no problem. My eyes were just sweating." But as we talked with her later on in the week and asked her how she enjoyed the services, and she just really enjoyed them. She'd said that the reason that she was crying was that she felt home. That while she was there in the meeting, this was her first meeting, and she witnessed the sacrament being administered. She listened to the talks. We went to the classes. She came to the classes and went to Relief Society, and it felt like home to her. And she'd been searching for these in different faiths for something that felt this way, and it felt there. And so that was a great experience for her, and she ended up getting baptized, and she was just a strong member of the church. Good example to her grandchildren and her daughter, her and Sister Fabrini. Now, you have to picture this. Sister Fabrini was this very, very, the formal type of German person. And so as on that first experience when Sister Kelman got in the car, she was very friendly and open, and we could just see, my companion and I, we could just see Sister Fabrini kind of tighten up on the steering wheel as she was driving, but they became the best of friends. They were kind of not two peas in a pod. They were very different personalities, but they became very close. I think partly because of where they were in relation to where the church building was, and so they had to journey with each other, and so they interacted with each other on a regular basis because of that fellowship of being members of the church. But just a wonderful experience there. We had in that area, got to be a part of 3 or 4, I think 4 or 5 baptisms in that area, which was, for the German missionaries, sometimes that's a little, I think the average at the time when I was serving my mission was like two baptisms a year per missionary. Not to say that there weren't a number of baptisms that happened. They happened all the time. But it took a longer duration for people to investigate the church and to feel that spirit. And so we got the opportunity to see some influx. Now, not all of them stayed, which is kind of sad because the youth program there is not, or at the time, wasn't very strong in that particular, because there weren't very many youth. And it was so spread out because Bremen is like a 50-mile wide city from one end to the other end, because it's right along the river there. And so it was a little bit difficult sometimes for the youth to interact with one another. And so some of them kind of didn't retain their, didn't stay active. I'd like to think, though, that today that they are still active, or maybe came back and are active in the church.